Welcome back to FM Story and the £1 billion Football Manager Experiment, the series where we take the weakest team in each country's top flight and hand them an unbelievable £1 billion to see what happens when money meets football in reality. We began in Scotland with Livingston, and their journey was dramatic. Across 16 seasons, they didn't manage to win the Premiership, yet the £1 billion did bring progress, brand new stadium, some upgraded facilities and some silverware in the form of a Scottish Cup and a Scottish League Cup. European nights added some excitement, but the story was ultimately defined by a runaway wage bill and financial chaos that overshadowed everything they achieved. Now, the experiment moves south to Italy. Welcome to Pisa, as you can see, predicted to finish bottom of the table, newly promoted, operating on a tiny budget, and expected to struggle against giants like Juventus, Milan and Inter. Just like Livingston, we've made only one change. Pisa now have a bank balance of exactly £1 billion. Everything else, the facilities, the reputation, the squad, the transfer budget, remains untouched. The question is simple. Will Pisa learn from Livingston's mistakes? Can they use their fortune to build a squad capable of surviving Serie A, or even shocking it? Or will they become the next club to prove that money alone can't save a team built for relegation? Let's dive into the beginning of Season 1 in Italy and find out whether Pisa can turn £1 billion into a miracle or a mess. So obviously, as we said, they're predicted to finish bottom. It is pretty tight in terms of the odds at the bottom, so they're not overwhelming favourites. I mean, they are favourites to finish bottom, but if they have a decent season, any one of these teams could replace them in the drop zone. We're looking at a club with a 17,000 all-seat arena that can, a capacity of 9,942 that can be used in. We're looking at a club with a reputation of just over 6,000. Financially, obviously, we've adjusted the bank balance to be £1 billion. We've not changed anything else in the finances. Facility-wise, the stadium's got a capacity of 17,000, but it's only 9,942 for all-seater competitions. There is the ability to expand it depending on what they do with the money. And then in terms of facilities, I would sort of say average. The youth facilities are pretty decent. They've actually got some decent corporate facilities looking at that. Now, if they expand the stadium, that might bring more in from that point of view. In terms of the squad, there are some names that are pretty well known. Calvin Steng's in on loan, Quadrado, Raul Albiol. The wage bill isn't too bad, but given what we saw with Livingston, I do wonder if that's one thing that might spiral out of control quickly. And I do wonder in the bigger leagues whether the wage bill will spiral out of control quicker and they'll burn through the cash even quicker. But without further ado, let's get on and simulate Season 1 and find out what happens. And so, at the end of Season 1, Pisa have managed to outperform that expectation of finishing bottom. Unfortunately, it wasn't quite enough to save them, going down by 2 points behind Sassuolo, who finished 17th. They got off to a pretty bad start to the season, which included going out in the first round of the Coppa Italia. And then it was the end of October before they picked up the first victory in the league. And then the end of December before they picked up the second one. Things did improve a bit in the second half of the season, more victories, including winning 3 of the last 5 games. But unfortunately, it wasn't enough to keep them up. In terms of transfer business, they did spend a relatively decent amount of money. It was less than they had in terms of the transfer budget, but they spent 7.25 million. They got a couple of players in on free transfers in Fernandinho and Ismaili. But then, they spent 2.2 million on Durati from Sassuolo, who doesn't appear to have played. And then Ibrahima Sissoko came in and did all right for them as a defensive midfielder for 4.3 million. Looking at what they were paying salary-wise, I mean, they were the 19th highest paying team in the league. It's not really a surprise. They didn't add that much quality during the season, so it's not much of a surprise that they went down. And in terms of the wages, not an awful lot changed. There's a couple of players that look like they've been given new deals that have taken them above some of the players that were there before, but Stengs, having been in on loan, still the highest paid player by quite some distance. So it hasn't spiraled out of control in this first season. The reputation's obviously dropped quite a bit as a result of being relegated. Financially, 984 million. So basically, they've lost 16 million or spent 16 million in this first season, which actually isn't really that bad. But as seasons go on, I think we might see the wage bill rocket. It's obviously at a low level in Serie A. It'll be interesting to see if they get promoted back to Serie A quickly, then what the wage bill is at that stage after the first season back in the top flight, because that could be where we see a big increase in what they're paying out. But let's move on to season 2 and see if they can get back to the top flight at the first time of asking. Season 2's done and dusted, and at the first time of asking, Pisa have got themselves back to the top flight, finishing second in Serie B, 3 points behind Cagliari, a couple of points ahead of Cremonese. But going into the last game of the league season, Pisa and Cremonese were level on 69 points. Pisa managed to beat Venezia, Cremonese drew with Spezia, and that meant that Cremonese missed out on automatic promotion and went into the playoffs, where they got beaten to promotion by Palermo. But obviously the most important thing is Pisa back into the top flight. Looking at the season, obviously a much better season, much more in terms of victories. Got off to a great start, winning in the first round of the Coppa Italia against Pescara, winning the first 3 league games of the season. But then October turned into a bit of a nightmare, with losing 3 out of 4 league games, getting knocked out of the Coppa Italia by 10-man Atalanta. But then a bounce back and a pretty steady season for the rest of the season. The number of draws from March onwards almost cost them automatic promotion, but back to the top flight they go. A lot of money in transfers. No necessarily big signings coming in. The money was spread, but it was like over 20 million that they spent. None of the players really kind of, you would say, looking at the average rating and looking at goals and assists and things, really set the world alight. And in terms of the transfers out, some players that went on to have decent seasons out of the club. I mean, Scuffert left, the goalkeeper. Quadrado left. But hopefully they can build going into that season back in the top flight. They did have the biggest salary, slightly higher than Cagliari, but on a par with the teams that were around them. So certainly in terms of Cremonese, who finished 3rd in the league, there's not that much of a difference there. So it's not as though they were outspending everyone. The reputation's seen a bit of a bounce back, obviously from being promoted. Financially, quite a bit of money's gone. So they're down to 713 million in the bank. Obviously, there's no real concern there. You kind of expect that. I mean, they've got themselves a 230 million transfer budget going ahead. It'll be interesting to see what they actually do spend. And then, I mean, the ground capacity has been increased. In the previous season, the capacity for all seated competitions and the used capacity was the same at 9,942. They've bumped up the used capacity for this season to 12,000. Obviously, it looks like they've done some work on it as well, because the stadium decay seems to have dropped. And this is probably where the money's gone that we've seen go out with the bank balance. Training facilities increased, youth facilities increased. So between the two of them, that's probably taken up a big chunk of that money that's been spent this season. Now, we can see the wage bill is starting to spiral, especially considering when you factor in this has been a season in Serie B, there was only one player above 30,000 a week at the end of last season. We've now got 7 players above 30 grand and 4 above 40 grand. Obviously, some players came in, must have been on free transfers that we didn't see on the previous screen, in terms of Jordan Ayew and Irikaburu. They've both come in and obviously been a big addition in terms of the number of goals that they've scored. And hopefully they can survive season 3 in Serie A and start to progress up the table. Season 3 is over, the first season back in the top flight, and Pisa have managed to stay up in the end pretty comfortably by 10 points above Palermo, who were in the last of those relegation spots. A pretty decent opening to the season, winning in the first round of the Coppa Italia, and then winning 2-0 at home against Napoli in the opening league game of the season, but then a run of draws and defeats, not picking up the second league win until towards the end of November against Palermo. In that run of form, defeat against Genoa on penalties in the Coppa Italia. And basically, the season looked like it was a couple of long runs of draws and defeats, and then a win or two, and then back to that long run of draws or defeats. But in the end, comfortably kind of staying up. A lot of money spent in this transfer window there, as you can see, 55 million on incomings with only 1.2 million recouped from players going out. Certainly, so in terms of the incomings, quite a bit of money looks like it was spent in the January transfer window, because that's Bertola in from Udinese from 17 million in January, Schwaber in from Cologne in February for 7.5 million, Sadiki Sharif in for 7 million in January. Tosti came in January as well. Quite a lot of players coming in January. And a couple of players really did seem to come up big. Gabellini only started 13 games, 6 goals. Sadiki Sharif coming in January, 4 goals in 15 games in the second half of the season there. So things have gone pretty well for them. The one thing we did wonder about was the wage bill. The last time they were in Serie A in season 1, it was just over 24 million. Last season in Serie B, it was just over 28.5 million. This season, first season back in Serie A, 79.44 million. Now, I know they've spent an awful lot of money on transfers, and obviously to attract players, it's going to cost them money, but that makes them the 8th highest wage-paying side in Serie A, more than Lazio. And yeah, the wage bill has spiraled. We had 7 players on over 40,000 a week at the end of last season. We've now got 10 players on over 40,000 a week, but we've also got 4 players on over £100,000 a week, and even more than that, they're on more than £150,000 a week. It is quite astounding, some of these wages. I mean, they're paying Bertola £200,000 a week. Irikaburu, who obviously they brought in last season, is getting £205,000 a week, and you would think for £205,000 a week you'd maybe get more than 8 goals in the season. Based on what the spent transfer was and what that wage bill is, I'm expecting the bank balance to come down significantly. It was 713 million at the end of last season. It's now down to 592 million. Obviously, it's still a sizable sum, still a sizable transfer budget available. The capacity has increased a touch. The used capacity last season was 12,000. It's now up to 13,808. And again, the training in youth facilities have seen a significant upgrade, which has obviously contributed to that drop in bank balance. And youth coaching and youth recruitment seen a slight increase as well. So they're obviously putting money into the facilities, but as we saw with Livingston, that wage bill has spiralled quickly. Now, the interesting thing will be to see if they stay up in the next couple of seasons. Is that wage bill going to rival the Inters, the Milans, the Juves at the top of the pile? Let's have a look and see if they can survive again in season 4. So, season 4 in the books, and a slight improvement on last season. A couple more points than last season, and also finishing a place higher in the league in 15th. While we're looking at the league stuff, just to look at the wage bill, and it has spiralled even further from about 79.5 million at the end of season 3. They're now spending £115 million a year on the wage bill. The only clubs higher than them, Inter, Juve, Milan, Napoli and Roma. That is bonkers. Things didn't get off to the best of starts this season. Losing on penalties to Spezia in the Coppa Italia first round, and then not exactly the easiest start to the season with Milan, Atalanta, Napoli and Roma in the first 4 games of the season. They managed to pick up a point from that, and then it took until the middle of October for them to get their first win in the season, which was against Juventus. Then another bad run before a victory in November against Parma. And then lots of draws, lots of defeats until February. Now, we'll have a look at the transfers in a minute and see if there was an influx of players in January. But February, winning 4 out of 5 games. And then following that, we didn't have that long run of draws and defeats that they've seen in the last couple of seasons in the top flight. Couple of draws, couple of defeats, and a few wins here and there. So second half of the season, definitely much better than the first half. In fact, I wonder if we can see. In the first half of the season, they picked up 12 points from 19 games, which was the second worst in the league. And then in the second half of the season, they managed to pick up 37 points from the second 19 games, which is obviously what saved them this season. Transfer-wise, obviously not as much spent this season as was spent last season, 19.5 million on incoming players. There was a lot of players came in. There was 18 players coming, so there's a lot of players have come in on free transfers or for no money, including Anthony Robinson coming in on a free transfer late in July. Played basically the whole season, had an outstanding season by the looks of things. Bilal El Khanous coming in as well. He's done well. He came in on a free in February. And overall, I think transfers did pretty well. But looking at the transfers, there wasn't as many players came in as I probably expected in January and February, given that run in February. Van der Bremt came in on a free in January. Didn't exactly set the world alight. Jashari came in from Milan and did pretty well. El Khanous obviously came in and did pretty well as well. But something obviously just clicked in February for that little reversal of form. And now they've gone from 4 over 100,000 per week, 9 over 100,000. Still 2 over £200,000 a week. And by and large, the players over £100,000 a week have kind of performed. Well, certainly looking at the average ratings anyway. I mean, some of the concerns would perhaps be some of these players that aren't starting lots of games. But this wage bill has spiraled out of control. I don't know that it can possibly spiral too much more. I think The most we hit with Livingston was 145 million a year. So we're 30 million short of that with Pisa. But the question is obviously going to be, unless they can get themselves up the table and get some European football or sell some of these players for big money, how much longer is this money going to last? But let's see if we can make it 3 successful survivals in Serie A in season 5. Season 5 saw Pisa take a bit of a jump forward on the pitch, finishing 10th, level on points with Fiorentina in 9th, and comfortably safe of the drop, 14 points clear of 18th place there. The wage bill has dropped a touch since last season, but it's still over £100 million per year, which is bonkers given the size of the club. It actually made more money back in transfers than they spent, largely thanks to receiving £12.25 million from Bari for Idrissa Toure. The players that they signed, none of them have really made a big impact as far as the season's concerned, certainly in terms of starting games and scoring goals or anything like that. And as the wage bill has dropped a touch, we're now down to no one over £200,000 a week. And we still have about 9 players on over £100,000 a week. I mean, the concern would be the highest paid players only started 13 games. The second highest paid player started 6 and came off the bench in 24. And obviously, decent average rating, but that's got to be a concern that you're paying someone £190,000 per week, and they're not a regular starter in the side. In kind of an opposite to last season, they got off to a bit of a flyer, won comfortably in the first round of the Coppa Italia, and then won 4 out of the opening 5 games in the league. Ian only made it as far as the second round of the Coppa Italia, getting knocked out at home against Empoli, and then a bit of a bad run November, beginning of December, but it was then picked up in December through to sort of the middle of January, another decent run of form, and then they have finished 10th, but they have lost 6 out of the last 10 games, drawn 3 of them and only won 1 out of the last 10. In fact, 1 out of the last 13. If they'd somehow managed to pick up another couple of victories there, it would have propelled them potentially towards a European spot. But now the all-important check on the finances. I don't think we looked at the bank balance at the end of last season. It was 373 million. It's now 252 million. And that's without any real changes to the stadium or actually the facilities in the last couple of seasons either. So that wage bill is beginning to take its toll. They've already burned through 75% of the money in 5 seasons. How much longer is this going to be allowed to carry on for? Oh, season 6 done and dusted. Another mid-table finish, dropping down to 11th, but with point more than they had in season 5. And the wage bill's coming down again, down to 90 million. A bit more manageable, but as the wage bill comes down, is that going to have an impact on the performances on the pitch? Transfer-wise, 1 player came in on a free transfer and didn't play a game by the looks of it. And then in terms of outgoings, not much. Some players out on loan. And 1 player who presumably wasn't a first-team player. The top end of the wage bill looks pretty similar to what it was last season in terms of the number of players, certainly over £100,000 a week. Some of the players' wages come down. But again, now the highest paid player started 4 games, 22 substitute appearances. Isn't exactly proven to be value for money, but that contract is up this summer. as is the contract of Anthony Robinson, who actually certainly seems to be earning his money there. It'll be interesting to see what happens as we go into the next season as to whether either of those two players are still at the club. Performance-wise, Pisa made it into the quarter-final of the Coppa Italia. Fortunately, that was a run of bad games. So the start of February that saw them exit at that stage against Inter. But otherwise, a relatively decent season. Again, mid-table, secure in the top flight. Now, with the bank balance dwindling, and it's down to 109 million in the bank now. So with that bank balance dwindling, the wage bill decreasing, is this as high as Pisa are going to get mid-table, or are they somehow going to be able to get further up the table and qualify for Europe? We've made it to the end of season 7 and another mid-table finish, again dropping place in the league, but again gaining a point in terms of the total points for the season, ending up with 51 points. Another decent season on the pitch. Off the pitch, though, things are unravelling a bit. The bank balance is down to 26 million. Now, there are a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, looking at the facilities, the training and youth facilities have been bumped up to state-of-the-art facilities. There's been another increase in the youth coaching and the youth recruitment. But there is a new stadium that's been built. However, things are running behind. They were supposed to move into it this summer. However, it's now not going to be available until November. Now, whether that, the fact that we've gone down to 25 million in the bank balance means I suspect next season might be the last season, unless somehow they get a lot more income from match day. The wage bill has dropped again from 90.5 million at the end of last season down to just over 72 million this season. It is around about where they finished in the league, but if it continues to drop too much more, then they could be in danger of slipping back down the table. And as you can see, with the wage bill dropping, we're now back down to just 4 players over £100,000 per week. The 2 players that we were looking at the end of last season who were out of contract, including Anthony Robinson, have obviously moved on as they're no longer anywhere near the top of the wage bill. And in fact, as you can see, both of those players, Anthony Robinson left on a free and went to Monterrey, and Tremoni left on a free and went to Paris FC. Both of them had decent seasons as well. And then in terms of the incomings, really not an awful lot. Brighthout coming in on a free transfer, had a good season, but no real impact from the rest of the players that came in. Bit of an up and down start of the season. They made it into the 3rd round of the Coppa Italia, losing on penalties. Napoli. And then a good spell, January and February, got them into a decent position. But just a bit of an inconsistent end to the season, saw them finish 12th. And that's 7 seasons in the book, and the money is starting to run short. I'm down to 25 million in the 26 million in the bank account. They're spending 72 million on wages. It very much looks as though next season could be the last season with this money. And here we are, the end of season 8, and the money has run out at Pisa. I mean, it looks as though it hasn't, because they've got 34.5 million in the bank. However, they did take out a loan 3 days ago, for 34.5 million. So that's why there's 34.5 million in the bank. They were at 0, and they've burned through £1 billion in 8 seasons. Things also went badly on the pitch. They finished 18th and were relegated. The wage bill had come back down to 57 million, which is the lowest it had been since the third season, there are still 2 players on over £100,000 a week, one of which is out of contract at the moment. One of which, I mean, Hamza Gersler has been getting over £100,000 a week for several seasons, and he's barely played. So he's got his money for basically nothing. And things did not go well this season at all. And it wasn't a great start to the season, losing on the penalties in the first round of the Coppa Italia to Catania. That sort of set the scene for how the season's gone. The money's run out. Like we say, they've managed to burn through the money pretty quickly without really achieving that much. The new stadium did get opened. It has a capacity of just under 24,000. It can be expanded to 36,000. But the money has run out. They have managed to up the facilities and get that new stadium. But 1 billion doesn't seem to take you very far. And that brings the Pisa experiment to a close. 8 seasons, £1 billion burned. And what do they have to show for it? Shiny new stadium, state-of-the-art facilities, and a wage bill that spiralled to rival Livingston's from the last episode. But on the pitch, the dream never arrived. Mid-table finishes were the best they could achieve, never breaking into Italy's elite despite the fortune at their disposal. Just like Livingston, Pisa proved that money alone can't rewrite history. It can build infrastructure, it can inflate wages, but it can't guarantee success. Question now is, which club will be the next to take on the £1 billion challenge, and will they finally crack the code? The experiment continues.